The rope burned against Jacob Brennan's neck, rough hemp fibers scratching skin that would be dead in moments, and he forced himself to look at the mountains beyond the crowd rather than the faces below that hungered for his death. He had not killed Martin Caldwell. The truth sat cold and useless in his chest, heavy as stone, worthless as last year's snow. Truth did not matter when Caldwell's father owned half the county and needed someone to hang. Jacob had been in the wrong place, had argued with Martin 2 days before over a card game, had no alibi that anyone would believe. A drifter's word against a founding family's grief. The morning sun broke over the Sawtooth Peaks, painting them gold and purple, and Jacob thought it was a fine last thing to see. Better than the scaffold, better than the faces. Some looked eager, some looked sick but watched anyway. A few looked away entirely, which he supposed passed for mercy in a place like Cutter's Ridge. Sheriff Dalton read the charges in a voice that carried across the square. Murder. Premeditated. The evidence had been damning because someone had made sure it would be. Jacob's knife found beside the body. Blood on Jacob's shirt, though he could not remember how it got there. Witnesses who swore they heard him threaten Martin's life, though Jacob knew he had said nothing of the sort. He had stopped protesting his innocence 3 days ago. No one listened. The trial had lasted an afternoon. Judge Morrison had looked tired and old and defeated, and Jacob understood. You could not fight the Caldwells in Cutter's Ridge. You could only do what they wanted and hope they left you alone. The hangman adjusted the noose. A man named Pierce, thin and nervous, who did this work because someone had to and the pay was steady. He would not meet Jacob's eyes. Jacob did not blame him. Any last words? Sheriff Dalton's voice carried duty but no enthusiasm. Jacob almost laughed. What words could matter now? He opened his mouth, though he had no idea what would come out, and that was when the shouting started. "Stop, that human is mine." The voice cut through the murmuring crowd like an axe through kindling. Heads turned. People gasped. Jacob looked down and saw her shoving through the press of bodies, green skin bright in the morning sun, dark hair pulled back from a face marked by small tusks and fierce determination. An orc woman. In Cutter's Ridge. Pushing toward the scaffold with no apparent fear of the humans who recoiled from her touch. "Stop this execution." She reached the base of the scaffold, chest heaving, one hand gripping the rail. "That man is mine. He is my husband. I invoke the bond clause." Silence fell like a thunderclap. Sheriff Dalton stared at her. The hangman's hands went slack. Jacob felt his heart hammer against his ribs, the noose suddenly loose enough to breathe around as Pierce stepped back in confusion. "What?" The sheriff found his voice first. "What did you say?" The orc woman lifted her chin. She wore a simple dress, brown homespun that had seen hard use, and boots caked with road dust. Her eyes were amber, bright and strange, and they fixed on Jacob with an intensity that made something catch in his chest. "He is my husband," she repeated, slower this time, each word precise. "Married 4 months past, before he came to Cutter's Ridge looking for work. I have been searching for him since. The bond clause of the territorial statute says you cannot execute a man whose spouse claims him without review by circuit authority. I claim him. Cut him down." Jacob's mind spun. He had never seen this woman before in his life. He had no wife. He had no one, which was why the noose had found him so easily. But she stood there with her shoulders back and her jaw set, lying with such brazen confidence that for a moment even he almost believed her. "That is absurd," someone shouted from the crowd. "Orcs and humans do not marry." "Some do," the woman shot back. "The law does not forbid it, and the bond clause does not specify species, only marriage. I have invoked it. You must honor it or break territorial law." Sheriff Dalton looked at Judge Morrison, who had risen from his seat near the scaffold. The judge was a gray man, gray hair and gray whiskers and gray eyes that had seen too much compromise. He looked at the orc woman for a long moment. "What is your name?" Morrison's voice was quiet. "Willa Kravik." "And you claim this man is your husband?" "I do. Can you prove it?" Willa hesitated just a fraction of a second, and Jacob saw the lie waver. Then she straightened. "We were married by a traveling priest in the borderlands. No courthouse, no papers. But we spoke vows before witnesses. That counts under common law marriage doctrine." Morrison's mouth thinned. He looked up at Jacob. "Do you confirm this?" Every eye in the square fixed on Jacob. The noose still hung around his neck. His hands were still bound behind his back. One word would send Willa away and the hangman back to his lever. One word would end this farce. Jacob looked at the orc woman who had just lied to save his life. At the desperate hope, barely hidden beneath her defiant expression. At the trembling in her fingers where they gripped the rail. "Yes," he heard himself say. "She is my wife." The crowd erupted. Shouts of outrage, of disbelief, of disgust. Someone threw something that clattered against the scaffold. Sheriff Dalton raised his hands for quiet and got only more noise. Judge Morrison climbed the scaffold steps, moving with the careful slowness of age and reluctance. "Cut him down," Morrison said to Pierce. "The bond clause is valid. Execution is stayed pending circuit review." "This is insane." The shout came from near the back. Jacob recognized the voice. Gerald Caldwell, Martin's father, pushing forward with murder in his eyes. "That creature is lying. My son is dead and this man killed him." "The law is the law, Gerald." Morrison's voice carried steel beneath the weariness. "I do not like it any better than you do, but I will not break statute because it is inconvenient. The circuit judge will review the case when he arrives next month. Until then, Jacob Brennan stays alive." Pierce's hands shook as he loosened the noose and lifted it over Jacob's head. Air rushed into Jacob's lungs, sweet and clean, and his knees nearly buckled. The hangman cut the ropes binding his wrists, and blood rushed back into his hands with a pins and needles burn. "Get him to the jail," Morrison said to Dalton. "And the woman too. We will sort this out properly." The sheriff and his deputy hauled Jacob down the scaffold steps. His legs felt like water. The crowd parted around them, hostile and churning, and Jacob caught glimpses of Willa being escorted by another deputy, her face calm but her shoulders tight with tension. They shoved him into a cell that still smelled of the breakfast he had not been able to eat. The door clanged shut. Jacob sat on the narrow cot and put his head in his hands, trying to understand what had just happened. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. He had lost his sense of time in the days since his arrest. Finally, footsteps approached, and Judge Morrison appeared outside the cell bars, Willa beside him and Sheriff Dalton hovering in the background. "We have a problem," Morrison said without preamble. "Actually, we have several problems, but the immediate one concerns the two of you." Jacob lifted his head. Willa stood very still, her amber eyes fixed on the judge. "The bond clause requires actual marriage," Morrison continued. "Not a claim, not an intention, an actual legal union. If you are not truly married, the stay evaporates and we proceed with the hanging. Today." "We are married," Willa said, but her voice lacked the earlier conviction. "No, you are not." Morrison's tone was not unkind. "I have been a judge for 30 years. I know a desperate lie when I hear one. You saw an innocent man about to die and you tried to save him. I respect that, but the law does not care about good intentions." Willa's jaw tightened. "Then what happens now? Now I offer you a choice." Morrison looked between them. "You can both admit the lie, in which case the execution proceeds immediately. Or you can make it truth. I can marry you." Right now in this jailhouse with Sheriff Dalton and his deputy as witnesses. A legal, binding marriage under territorial law. Jacob's breath caught. Willa's eyes went wide. If you marry, the bond clause holds. The execution stays halted until the circuit judge reviews the case. That gives you a month, maybe more, to find evidence of Jacob's innocence. If you can prove someone else killed Martin Caldwell, Jacob goes free. If you cannot, he hangs as sentenced, married or not. The bond clause only delays. It does not pardon. And if we refuse to marry, Jacob's voice came out hoarse from the rope burn, then I thank the lady for her courage and you walk back to the scaffold. Silence filled the jailhouse. Somewhere outside, the crowd still murmured and stirred, waiting to see if they would get their hanging after all. Jacob looked at Willa. She looked back. Two strangers, staring at each other across the bars of a cell, deciding whether to tie their lives together to buy a few more weeks. "Why did you do it?" Jacob asked. "You do not know me." Willa's expression softened slightly. "I have been in Cutter's Ridge for 3 days. I heard about the trial. I watched you in that courtroom and I saw a man who had given up fighting because no one would listen. I know what that looks like. I know what it costs." She paused. "And I saw the Caldwells. I saw how they looked at you. That was not grief. That was something else. So you decided to save me." "I decided not to watch an innocent man hang when I might stop it." "How do you know I am innocent? Are you?" Jacob held her gaze. "No, I did not kill Martin Caldwell. I do not know who did, but it was not me." Willa nodded as if that settled it. "Then we should not let you hang for it." Judge Morrison cleared his throat. "I need an answer. The crowd outside is getting restless and Gerald Caldwell is organizing them. If you are going to do this, we do it now." Jacob's mind raced. Marriage to a stranger. An orc stranger in a town that barely tolerated orcs passing through, let alone living among them. It was insane. It was desperate. It was also the only chance he had to prove his innocence and maybe, just maybe, live to see another sunrise. "I will do it," he said. "If she will." Willa's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. "I will," Morrison nodded. "Sheriff, get him out of that cell. Let us make this quick before I come to my senses and remember all the reasons this is a terrible idea." They gathered in the sheriff's office, a cramped room that smelled of tobacco and old coffee. Morrison sent the deputy to fetch a Bible from the courthouse. Dalton stood against the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Jacob and Willa faced each other in the space between the desk and the stove. Up close, Jacob could see details he had missed from the scaffold. Willa was not tall, perhaps a hand shorter than his own 6 feet. Her build was solid but not heavy, the strength of someone who worked for a living. Her hands bore calluses. A scar marked her left eyebrow, pale against green skin. Her tusks were small, barely visible when her mouth was closed and her ears came to delicate points. She looked tired. She looked determined. She looked real in a way that made his chest ache with something he could not name. The deputy returned with the Bible. Morrison opened it and motioned them closer together. "Join hands," the judge said. Jacob held out his hands. They still bore rope marks from the binding. Willa placed her hands in his, and her skin was warm and rough and steady. He realized his own hands were shaking. Morrison read the words quickly, without ceremony or embellishment. The traditional vows stripped to their bones. "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man? For better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and health?" "I do," Jacob said when prompted, and his voice did not shake as badly as he feared. "I do," Willa said, and her amber eyes never left his face. "By the authority vested in me by the territorial government, I pronounce you married. What God has joined, let no man separate." Morrison closed the Bible with a soft thump. "Congratulations. You are now husband and wife, and the execution is officially stayed pending circuit review. Sheriff, release Jacob Brennan into his wife's custody. He is to remain in town, check in daily, and cause no trouble. Understood. Understood, Jacob managed. They signed papers. Morrison wrote quickly, his pen scratching across official forms. Dalton witnessed the signatures with a face like stone. In less than 10 minutes, Jacob Brennan went from condemned murderer to married man, released on recognizance, property of no one but bound by law to a woman whose last name he had learned only an hour ago. The sheriff walked them to the jailhouse door and stopped. The crowd is still out there. Gerald Caldwell is with them. I suggest you leave quickly and quietly. Head to the boarding house on Cedar Street. Mrs. Palmer is decent enough. She might rent you a room. Thank you, Willa said. Dalton's expression flickered, something almost like sympathy crossing his weathered features. I do not know what you think you are going to find in a month. The case against him was solid, but for what it is worth, I hope you find it. They stepped out into sunlight that felt too bright, too clean. The crowd had thinned but not dispersed. Faces turned toward them, some curious, some hostile. Jacob saw Gerald Caldwell standing near the scaffold, surrounded by men in good coats and expensive hats. The town's merchants and landowners. The people who mattered. Caldwell's eyes locked on Jacob, and the hatred there was pure and simple. This was not over. The month's reprieve had not changed anything except the date. Willa took Jacob's arm, a gesture that looked natural but felt strange, and steered him away from the square. They walked quickly, not quite running, past the general store and the saloon and the feed supplier. People stared. Someone spat on the ground as they passed. A woman pulled her child closer, as if Jacob and Willa carried plague. Cedar Street sat at the edge of town where the buildings grew shabbier and the yards wider. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Willa knocked on the door. Mrs. Palmer was a stout woman with iron gray hair and a face that suggested she had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She looked at Willa, then at Jacob, then back to Willa. I heard what happened in the square, she said. Whole town is talking about nothing else. We need a room, Willa said. We can pay. Can you now? Mrs. Palmer's tone was dry. And how much can you pay? $2 a week. That is fair. $3 and you do your own washing. I do not need trouble with the Caldwells. You will not get trouble from us, Jacob said. We just need a place to stay. Mrs. Palmer studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she stepped back and opened the door wider. Room at the top of the stairs, end of the hall. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. You miss them, you go hungry. No drinking, no fighting, no noise after dark. Break the rules and you are out, circuit judge or no circuit judge. The room was small, with a single narrow bed, a washstand, a chair, and a window that overlooked the street. The wallpaper was faded. The floorboards creaked. Jacob thought it was the most beautiful place he had ever seen because it was not a jail cell and not a noose. Willa closed the door behind them and leaned against it. For a moment neither spoke. Then she laughed, a short breathless sound that held more shock than humor. That was insane, she said. That was you, Jacob pointed out. I was just trying not to hang. Fair enough. She moved to the window and looked out at the dusty street. So here we are, married strangers with a month to prove you did not commit murder. Any ideas where we start? Jacob sat in the chair. His legs still felt unsteady. I have been trying to figure out who killed Martin Caldwell since they arrested me. I have no answers. I argued with him, yes. He cheated at cards and I called him on it, but I did not kill him. Someone else did, and they made very sure it looked like me. Tell me what you remember. Everything. So Jacob talked. He told her about drifting into Cutter's Ridge 2 months ago looking for work, finding a job at the lumber mill. He told her about the card game at the saloon where Martin Caldwell had been drunk and careless and obviously cheating. About the argument that followed, loud enough that half the saloon heard it. About walking away because fighting a Caldwell was asking for trouble. He told her about the morning 2 days later when Sheriff Dalton knocked on his door and arrested him. About the blood on his shirt that he could not explain because he had gone to sleep wearing a different shirt and woken to find this one on him instead. About his knife found beside Martin's body in the alley behind the feed store, though Jacob had not seen his knife in a week, thought he had lost it somewhere. They found him in the morning, Jacob said. Stabbed 3 times, dead several hours. They arrested me before noon, tried me the next day, sentenced me that evening. It was like they already knew exactly how it would go. Willa listened without interrupting, her brow furrowed in concentration. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The shirt bothers me," she said finally. "You are certain you went to sleep in different clothes?" "Completely certain. I remember because I spilled gravy on my shirt at dinner and changed before bed. I woke up wearing a shirt I had not seen before, and it had blood on the sleeve." "So someone came into your room while you slept, changed your shirt and left. That took planning. That took knowledge of where you lived and that you would be alone." Willa turned from the window. "Who knew where you stayed? Anyone. I rented a room above the mill office. It was not exactly secret. Still. The knife, the shirt, the timing. Someone set you up deliberately. That means someone wanted Martin Caldwell dead and wanted you blamed for it." Jacob rubbed his face. "I know, but who and why? I had only been in town 2 months. I had no enemies except Martin, and he was the victim." "What about Martin? Did he have enemies?" "He was a Caldwell. I am sure plenty of people resented him, but resented enough to kill, enough to frame a stranger for it. I do not know." Willa paced the small room, thinking. "We need to find out more about Martin, about who might have wanted him dead, about what he was involved in. The Caldwells will not talk to us. No one in this town will help us. They have already decided I am guilty. Then we talk to the people who do not matter to the Caldwells. The ones they do not see. Servants, workers, drifters, people like you were, people like me." Willa stopped pacing and met his eyes. "We have a month. We use it." Jacob looked at her, this woman who had appeared from nowhere and lied to save his life and married him in a jailhouse to make the lie stick. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Willa was quiet for a moment. "Because I know what it is like when no one listens. When your word means nothing because of what you are. Because you are orc or drifter or poor or any of 100 things that make you not matter." Her voice was soft but fierce. "I will not stand by and watch it happen when I can do something, even if the something is insane." "Thank you," Jacob said. "I know those are just words, but I do not have anything else." "Then we will find something else. We will find the truth." Willa managed a tired smile. "But first I need to sleep. I have been walking for 3 days to get here and I am dead on my feet." They looked at the single narrow bed. Jacob stood quickly. "You take it. I will sleep on the floor. Do not be ridiculous. We are married now. We can share a bed without drama." "I am not assuming anything," Jacob said carefully. Willa's expression softened. "I know, and I appreciate it. But I am also practical. The floor is hard. You almost hanged this morning and we both need rest. We can manage one bed for one night." She had a point. Jacob nodded. They took turns at the washstand, awkward and careful about privacy. When they finally lay down, Jacob on one side and Willa on the other with a careful space between, he was certain he would not sleep. Too much had happened. His mind spun with fear and confusion and desperate hope. But exhaustion had its own weight, and Willa's breathing was steady beside him, and the bed was soft and slowly, impossibly, Jacob felt himself drift. His last thought before sleep took him was that he was alive. Against every expectation, every certainty, he was alive. And tomorrow he would start fighting to stay that way. He woke to gray dawn light and the smell of frying bacon drifting up from the kitchen. Willa was already awake, sitting by the window, looking out at the street. She had braided her hair, and in the soft light she looked young and tired and determined. "Morning," Jacob said. She turned and offered a slight smile. "Morning, breakfast will be ready soon, then we start." They ate in the boarding house dining room with 3 other residents, none of whom spoke to them. Mrs. Palmer served eggs and bacon and biscuits without comment. The food was plain and hot and good, and Jacob ate more than he had in days. After breakfast, they walked back toward the center of town. Jacob checked in with Sheriff Dalton as required. A brief, awkward encounter in which the sheriff reminded him not to leave Cutter's Ridge and wished him luck with a tone that suggested luck would not be enough. Then they began asking questions. The saloon where Martin had played cards was called the Copper Bell, a dim establishment that smelled of whiskey and sawdust. The bartender was a thick-shouldered man named Hank who eyed Willa with suspicion, but agreed to talk. "Martin Caldwell was in here most nights," Hank said, wiping down the bar with a rag that had seen better days. "Played cards, drank too much, ran his mouth. Not a bad fellow when he was sober, but that was not often." "Was he winning or losing the night of the argument?" Willa asked. Hank frowned, thinking back. "Losing, mostly. That was why he was cheating. He was down about $40 and getting desperate." $40 is a lot," Jacob said. "It is. More than Martin usually carried. He had to write markers for most of it." "Who was he playing with?" "You, for one." "Also Samuel Voss, Terry Brennan, no relation to you I assume, and someone else I did not recognize." "A stranger passing through." Jacob tried to remember. The stranger had been quiet, well-dressed, older, had not said much. Did the stranger have a name? Never gave one. Paid cash, left early. "I have not seen him since." They thanked Hank and left. Outside, Willa frowned. "A stranger who disappeared. That is convenient, too convenient," Jacob agreed, "but I do not know how to find him." They spent the rest of the day talking to anyone who would listen. The blacksmith who had shoed Martin's horse the day before he died. The girl who worked at the general store where Martin bought tobacco. The hostler at the livery who had seen Martin arguing with someone in the street 2 nights before his death. "Could not hear what they were saying," the hostler said. He was an old man with rheumy eyes and gnarled hands, but it looked heated. Martin was waving his arms, all agitated. The other fellow was calmer, but you could tell he was angry underneath. "Who was the other man?" Willa asked. "Could not see his face. It was dark and he had his hat pulled low, but he was well dressed. Nice coat, good boots. Not a drifter or a worker, someone with money." Another piece that fit no pattern Jacob could see. They thanked the hostler and walked back toward the boarding house as evening settled over Cutter's Ridge. "We are collecting pieces," Willa said, "but I cannot see the picture yet." "Neither can I," Jacob admitted, "but it is more than I had before. Before, I was just waiting to hang. Now I am married and investigating and still probably going to hang, but at least I am doing something." Willa laughed, a real laugh this time. That is the spirit. They fell into a rhythm over the following days. Mornings checking in with the sheriff, then hours of questioning anyone in Cutter's Ridge who might know something. They learned that Martin Caldwell had been in debt, that he gambled more than he could afford, that his father had bailed him out more than once. They learned that he had been courting the daughter of a local rancher, though the rancher had not approved. They learned that Martin had been seen in the company of strangers several times in the weeks before his death, but none of it added up to a clear suspect or a clear motive. and every day brought them closer to the arrival of the circuit judge. Jacob was surprised to find that living with Willa was easy in ways he had not expected. She was practical and calm, unbothered by the stares and whispers that followed them through town. She had a dry sense of humor that surfaced at unexpected moments. She did not press him for conversation when he needed quiet, and she seemed to understand when he needed to talk. They shared the narrow bed each night, careful and respectful, and slowly the strangeness of it faded. Jacob found himself noticing small things. The way Willa hummed while braiding her hair, the way she tilted her head when thinking hard, the small scar on her knuckles from some old injury. She was not a stranger anymore, though he could not say exactly when that had changed. 2 weeks after the wedding, they were walking back from another day of questions when they passed the church. The door stood open, and Father Duncan stood on the steps, a stout man with kind eyes and silver hair. "Jacob Brennan," he called. A moment, they stopped. Jacob had not spoken to the priest since before his arrest. Duncan had not been at the trial. "I heard you married," Duncan said, looking at Willa, "under unusual circumstances." "You could say that," Jacob replied carefully. "I also heard you maintain your innocence." "I do." Duncan nodded slowly. "I believe you. I do not think you killed Martin Caldwell." Jacob's heart jumped. "Why?" "Because I heard his last confession 3 days before he died. And a man who confesses his sins with that much fear is not afraid of a drifter with a grudge. He is afraid of something much worse." Willa stepped forward. "What did he confess?" "I cannot tell you that. The seal of confession is sacred." Duncan's expression was troubled. "But I can tell you that Martin was involved in something dangerous, something that weighed on his conscience. He wanted to stop, but he was afraid. He said if he tried to pull out, they would kill him." "They?" Jacob pressed. "Who are they?" He did not say. But I got the sense it was more than one person, an operation of some kind. He mentioned money changing hands, things being moved in secret. He was vague, but he was terrified. Willa and Jacob exchanged glances. This was the first real lead they had found. "Is there anything else you can tell us?" Willa asked. "Anything that would not break the seal," Duncan thought for a long moment. He mentioned a place. "The old Garner homestead, out past the North Ridge," said he had to go there to meet them. That was 2 days before he died. "Thank you, Father," Jacob said. "This helps more than you know." They left the church and walked quickly back to the boarding house. In their room, Willa pulled out the rough map she had been drawing of the area around Cutter's Ridge. "The Garner homestead," she said, tracing her finger across the paper. "I have seen it. It has been abandoned for years. If Martin was meeting people there, it would be private. No witnesses." "We need to go look," Jacob said. "Tonight?" "No, daylight. I want to see what we are walking into." They set out the next morning before dawn, telling Mrs. Palmer they were going for a walk. The trail north led through pine forest and rocky meadows. The Garner homestead sat in a hollow between 2 ridges, a cluster of rotting buildings surrounded by fields gone to weed. They approached carefully, watching for signs of occupation. The main house was a wreck, roof partially collapsed, windows broken. But the barn looked sturdier, and when they got closer, Jacob saw that the weeds around it were trampled. Someone had been here recently. The barn door hung askew. They slipped inside. The interior was dim and smelled of old hay and mouse droppings. But in the back corner, hidden under a canvas tarp, they found wooden crates. Willa pulled the tarp aside. Jacob pried open one of the crates. Inside, wrapped in straw, were bottles of whiskey. "Good whiskey, expensive labels." "Smuggling," Willa said softly. "They are running illegal liquor." Jacob opened another crate. More whiskey, and beneath it small leather pouches. He opened one and found gold dust. "Not just liquor," he said. "Gold too. This is a smuggling operation. They are moving goods across the border, avoiding taxes. And Martin was part of it, Willa said. But he wanted out and they killed him to keep him quiet. Then framed me because I was convenient. Jacob felt anger rise, hot and bitter. They murdered him and let me take the blame. We need to tell the sheriff, Willa said. Will he believe us? The Caldwells have more influence than we do. We have evidence now. We have this. Willa gestured at the crates. We can bring Dalton here, show him. They were so focused on the crates that they did not hear the footsteps until it was too late. The barn door swung open, flooding the space with light, and a voice said, "Well, well." "What do we have here?" Jacob spun. 3 men stood in the doorway. He recognized 2 of them. Samuel Voss, who had been at the card game, and Thomas Merrick, who owned the feed store. The third was a stranger, tall and thin with cold eyes. "Jacob Brennan," Merrick said. "You just cannot leave well enough alone, can you? You killed Martin Caldwell," Jacob said, "and you framed me for it." Merrick smiled, a thin expression without warmth. "Martin was a liability. He got scared, threatened to confess. We could not have that. So you murdered him and set me up to hang. It was efficient. You were already arguing with him. Easy to plant evidence, easy to spread the story, and it worked. You were supposed to die 2 weeks ago." Merrick's eyes shifted to Willa. Then she interfered. "Why gold and whiskey?" Willa asked, her voice steady despite the tension. "What is worth killing over?" "Money," Merrick said simply. "A great deal of money. We move goods across the border, sell them where they are scarce, pocket the difference. Martin helped us because he needed cash to cover his debts. But he developed a conscience at exactly the wrong time." The tall stranger stepped forward. He held a pistol, pointed casually at Jacob. "You 2 are going to disappear. A tragic accident, newlyweds wandering the wilderness, falling to their deaths. Very sad." Jacob's mind raced. They were trapped in the barn, outnumbered, outgunned. But they had to do something. Willa moved before he could. She grabbed the edge of the open crate and shoved it hard into Voss, who was closest. The crate tipped, bottles smashing, and Voss stumbled back with a curse. Jacob lunged for the stranger with the gun. They collided hard. The gun went off, deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet burying itself in the barn wall. Jacob grappled with the stranger, fighting for the weapon. He was vaguely aware of Willa dodging Merrick's grab, using her lower center of gravity to slip past him. Jacob got his hand on the stranger's wrist and twisted. The gun fell. They both dove for it. Jacob's fingers closed on the grip just as the stranger's boot caught him in the ribs. Pain exploded through his chest and he rolled, gasping. The stranger lunged. Jacob brought the gun up and fired without thinking. The shot took the stranger in the shoulder and he went down, screaming. Willa had grabbed a broken board and swung it hard into Merrick's knee. The merchant went down with a howl. Voss was scrambling for the door. Jacob aimed the pistol at him. "Stop," Voss froze. "Sit down," Jacob said. "All of you, hands where I can see them." They sat. Merrick was white-faced with pain. The stranger clutched his bleeding shoulder. Voss looked sick with fear. "Willa, can you get to town?" Jacob asked. "Bring the sheriff." "I can," she said. "Will you be all right? I have the gun. I will manage. Go." She ran. Jacob stood in the barn, pistol trained on 3 men who had tried to kill him, and waited. His hands shook slightly. His ribs ached where he had been kicked. But he was alive, and they had the evidence, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Jacob thought maybe they would survive it. Sheriff Dalton arrived an hour later with 2 deputies and Judge Morrison. They arrested Merrick, Voss, and the stranger, whose name turned out to be Carson, a known smuggler from across the territorial line. They cataloged the crates of whiskey and gold. They listened to Jacob and Willa explain what they had found and what Merrick had confessed. Morrison's face grew darker with every word. "Thomas Merrick, I have known you 20 years. You are telling me you murdered Martin Caldwell and framed an innocent man." Merrick said nothing. His eyes were flat and empty. "And Gerald Caldwell?" Jacob asked. "Did he know?" "About the smuggling, about what really happened to his son." "Gerald knew nothing," Merrick said finally. "He believed you killed Martin because we made sure he would. We fed him evidence, fed him rage. He was a useful idiot." Morrison looked disgusted. "Take them to jail, all three. And someone ride to Gerald Caldwell and tell him the truth about his son. He deserves that much." They rode back to Cutter's Ridge in a wagon, Jacob and Willa sitting together in the back while the deputies drove and the prisoners sat in chains. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold. "We did it," Willa said quietly. "We actually did it." "You did it," Jacob said. "Without you, I would be dead." "Without both of us," she corrected. "I gave you time, you used it, we worked together." Jacob looked at her. She was dirty and tired, her dress torn at the hem from running through the woods, her hair coming loose from its braid. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my life, for believing me, for everything." Willa met his eyes and something passed between them, warm and fragile and real. "You are welcome." The circuit judge arrived 2 days later. His name was Harrison, a stern man with a reputation for fairness and no patience for corruption. He reviewed the evidence, interviewed witnesses, and spent half a day examining the smuggled goods now stored under guard at the jailhouse. On the third day, he called a hearing at the courthouse. The room was packed. Gerald Caldwell sat in the front row, looking older than Jacob remembered, his face carved with grief and fury. Not for Jacob this time. For the men who had murdered his son and let him believe a lie, Judge Harrison laid out the facts in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. The smuggling operation, Martin's involvement and his attempt to withdraw, the murder and the frame, Merrick's confession, corroborated by physical evidence and multiple witnesses. "It is the finding of this court that Jacob Brennan is innocent of all charges related to the death of Martin Caldwell," Harrison said. "The charges are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Brennan is free to go, with the court's apologies for the miscarriage of justice." The room erupted. Some people cheered. Some looked shocked. Gerald Caldwell sat very still, staring at nothing. Harrison banged his gavel for silence. Furthermore, Thomas Merrick, Samuel Voss, and Robert Carson are charged with murder, conspiracy, and smuggling. They will be held for trial at the next session. "This hearing is concluded." Jacob stood. His legs felt weak. Willa was beside him, her hand finding his, and they walked out of the courthouse together into bright afternoon sun. They stood on the courthouse steps, blinking in the light. People streamed past them, talking excitedly. A few nodded to Jacob. One man shook his hand and said he had never believed Jacob was guilty. Jacob doubted that but accepted the gesture. Gerald Caldwell emerged from the courthouse. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane. When he reached Jacob, he stopped. "I owe you an apology," Caldwell said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. "I wanted someone to pay for my son's death, and I did not care if it was the right person. I am sorry." Jacob did not know what to say. He settled for, "I am sorry about Martin. He did not deserve what happened to him." Caldwell nodded. He looked at Willa. "Thank you for saving an innocent man. That took courage." "It took what was right," Willa said quietly. Caldwell nodded again and walked away, old and broken. Jacob and Willa walked back to the boarding house. In their small room they sat together on the bed, shoulders touching, and let the reality sink in. "You are free," Willa said. "Really free. You can go anywhere, do anything." "I know," Jacob said. "Where will you go?" Jacob turned to look at her. "I was going to ask you the same thing." You came to Cutter's Ridge to save a stranger. Now the stranger is saved. What happens next for you?" Willa was quiet for a moment. "I do not know. I have been drifting for a long time, never staying anywhere, never putting down roots." She paused. "But this last month, working with you, having a purpose, it felt different. It felt like something I could build on." "We are still married," Jacob said carefully. "Legally. Actually married. Judge Morrison made sure of that, I know. We could get it annulled. Now that the case is over, there is no reason we have to stay bound together. You could go your own way. I would understand." Willa looked at him, her amber eyes searching his face. "Is that what you want?" Jacob took a breath. "No," he said. "No, it is not what I want. This last month, getting to know you, working beside you, I have been happier than I have in years, even with the threat of hanging over my head, because you were there." He reached for her hand. "I know this started as a lie to save my life, but somewhere along the way it became real for me." "You became real, and I do not want to lose that." Willa's expression softened. "It became real for me too. From the start, maybe. I saw you on that scaffold, and something in me knew I could not let you die. And then I got to know you, and I saw who you really were, and I knew I made the right choice." She squeezed his hand. "I do not want an annulment. I want to stay married. To you, if you will have me." "If I will have you," Jacob laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "You saved my life twice over, once from the noose and once from giving up. I am yours, Willa Brennan, for as long as you will keep me." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "Then we are agreed. We stay married." Jacob cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, not born of necessity or pretense but of genuine feeling. Her lips were soft and warm, and she kissed him back with a tenderness that made his heart ache. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "So what do we do now?" Willa asked. "Where do we go?" "I have some money saved," Jacob said. "Not much, but enough to make a start. There is land to be had in the territories, cheap if you are willing to work it. We could get a homestead, build something of our own." "A farm?" Willa's eyes brightened. "I grew up on a farm. I know the work." "Then that is what we do. We find a piece of land, file a claim, and build a life. Together." They spent the next week preparing. Jacob collected his wages from the lumber mill, where the foreman apologized profusely for believing he was a murderer. Willa sold the few possessions she had carried into town and bought supplies instead. They visited the land office and studied maps, looking for unclaimed parcels. They found a plot 30 miles south, near a river valley with good water and timber. It was remote but beautiful, and the land agent said the soil was decent if you worked it right. They filed the claim and paid the fees. The land was theirs. Gerald Caldwell sought them out the day before they planned to leave. He came to the boarding house with a small wooden box. "This belonged to Martin," he said, holding out the box. "His savings, about $200. I want you to have it." Jacob started to protest, but Caldwell raised a hand. "Please, let me do this. I cannot undo what I believed, what I helped push forward, but I can help you start fresh." Martin would want that. He was flawed, but he was not cruel. He would not want an innocent man to suffer for his mistakes. Jacob took the box. "Thank you. This will help more than you know." "Make a good life," Caldwell said. "Both of you, that is thanks enough." They left Cutter's Ridge on a clear morning in early autumn. Mrs. Palmer packed them food for the journey and said she was glad things had worked out, which was the closest to sentiment Jacob had ever heard from her. A few townspeople came to see them off. Father Duncan blessed their journey. Sheriff Dalton shook Jacob's hand and wished them luck. The road south was rough but manageable. They rode in a wagon Jacob had bought with part of Martin's money, pulled by a sturdy horse named Copper. Their belongings filled the wagon bed, everything they owned in the world. As Cutter's Ridge disappeared behind them, Jacob felt the weight of the last months begin to lift. He was free. He was alive. He was married to a woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. Willa sat beside him on the wagon seat, her shoulder pressed against his, and smiled at the road ahead. "Tell me about your farm," Jacob said. "The one you grew up on. What was it like?" And Willa told him. About her family, her childhood, the land they had worked. She talked as they traveled, and Jacob listened, learning her story, falling a little more in love with each mile. The land they claimed was everything the agent had promised. A river ran through the southern edge, clear and cold from the mountains. Timber covered the hills, good for building and firewood. The meadow land was thick with grass, perfect for grazing. They could see mountains in 3 directions. "It is perfect," Willa said, standing in the middle of what would become their homestead. "It will be perfect," Jacob corrected. "Right now it is just dirt and trees. We have to make it into something." They camped in the wagon while they built. Jacob felled trees and Willa trimmed them. Together they raised the frame of a cabin, small but solid, with a stone fireplace and a loft for sleeping. It took 3 weeks of brutal work, but when they finished and stood back to look at it, Jacob felt pride swell in his chest. "Our home," he said. "Our home," Willa agreed. They chinked the walls with mud and moss, laid a plank floor, built a door and shutters for the windows. Willa planted a kitchen garden near the cabin. Jacob built a small barn for copper, and the chickens they bought from a neighbor 5 miles downstream. The work was hard, but it was good work, honest and meaningful. Each nail Jacob drove, each board Willa planed, each row of vegetables they planted together was a piece of the life they were building. Not the life they had planned, but the life they had chosen. Winter came early that year. Snow fell in November and did not melt until March. They spent long evenings by the fire, Jacob carving spoons and bowls from scrap wood while Willa sewed and mended. They talked about everything and nothing. Willa told him about growing up orc in a world that often hated her for it. Jacob told her about his own childhood, his parents dead young, his years of drifting. "I never had a home," he said one night. "Not really, not since I was small. It was always temporary, always moving on." "You have one now," Willa said. "We have one now." She was right. This cabin, this land, this woman beside him. It was home. In the spring they plowed the meadow land and planted wheat and corn. The work was back-breaking, dawn to dusk, but the soil was good and the seeds took. By summer, green shoots covered the fields. Their nearest neighbor, a taciturn rancher named Samuel Burke, rode over one day to introduce himself. He looked at Willa for a long moment, then at Jacob, then back to Willa. "Heard about you two," Burke said. "Heard about what happened in Cutter's Ridge." Jacob tensed, ready for trouble. But Burke just nodded. "Takes courage to stand up like that, and it takes work to make land like this produce. You need help with harvest, send word. I will lend a hand." It was the beginning of acceptance. Slowly, other neighbors came by, some out of curiosity, some out of genuine friendliness. Not everyone was kind, but enough were. Enough to make them feel less alone. In the fall, they harvested their first crop. It was not a huge yield, but it was theirs, and they sold enough in the nearest town to buy supplies for the winter and a few head of cattle. Jacob built a proper barn. Willa expanded the garden. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Willa said, "I am happy. I did not think I would ever say that, but I am." Jacob put his arm around her. "So am I. Do you ever think about how this started, how insane it was?" "All the time," Jacob admitted. "I think about standing on that scaffold waiting to die, and I think about you shouting that I was yours, lying to save me." "It was not a lie," Willa said softly. "Not really, not in the way that mattered. You were already mine from the moment I decided you would not hang. I just did not know it yet." Jacob kissed her temple. "I love you. I do not think I have said that out loud yet, but I do. I love you, Willa." "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while now." They sat together as the stars came out, content in the life they had built from desperation and courage and unlikely love. The second year on the homestead was easier. Their crops were better, their herd was larger, and they had established themselves enough that people no longer stared when they came to town. They were just Jacob and Willa Brennan, the couple from the river valley who worked hard and kept to themselves and did not cause trouble. In the spring of their third year, Willa told Jacob she was pregnant. He stared at her, speechless, joy and terror warring in his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," she smiled. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Jacob said honestly. "But yes, yes, I am happy." Their daughter was born in the autumn, delivered by the midwife from town and Samuel Burke's wife, who had become a friend to Willa. She was small and perfect, with green-tinged skin and Jacob's dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wonder of the world. They named her Delilah. Holding his daughter for the first time, Jacob felt something shift inside him, a fierce protectiveness and love so strong it was almost painful. This child was part of him and part of Willa, a living symbol of the life they had made. "Hello, Delilah," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Willa, exhausted but radiant, smiled at them both. "Our family." "Our family," Jacob agreed. Delilah grew quickly, a bright, curious child who followed her parents everywhere. She helped Willa in the garden, her small hands patting dirt over seeds. She sat on Jacob's lap while he whittled, watching intently. She was a blend of both her parents, and she was loved beyond measure. When Delilah was 2, Willa gave birth to a second daughter whom they named Kira. Kira was quieter than her sister, more thoughtful, but just as loved. The cabin felt full in the best way, filled with laughter and occasional tears and the constant movement of small children. Jacob expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms so the girls could have space to grow. Willa taught them to read using a battered primer they bought in town. They grew up knowing they were different, human and orc blended, but also knowing they were safe and loved. The homestead prospered. Their fields produced well, their herd grew, and they became known in the area as reliable and fair. Jacob served on the committee that organized the local school. Willa helped organize a lending library. They built a life that mattered. One evening, when Delilah was 7 and Kira was 5, they sat on the porch watching the girls play in the yard. Delilah was showing Kira how to weave grass into braids, patient and careful. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked. "How we started. The lie, the desperation." Jacob thought about it. He thought about the noose around his neck, the certainty of death. He thought about Willa's voice cutting through the crowd, claiming him. He thought about everything that had come after, the fear and the investigation and the slow building of trust. "No," he said. "I do not regret a single moment, because every moment led to this. To you, to them, to the life we have. How could I regret that?" Willa leaned her head on his shoulder. "I do not regret it either. Best lie I ever told." Jacob laughed. "Best truth I ever lived." They sat together as the sun set and their daughters played, and the life they had built from ashes and courage continued around them. It was not the life Jacob had imagined standing on that scaffold. It was infinitely better. Years passed. The girls grew. Delilah became interested in medicine and apprenticed to the doctor in town. Kira loved animals and helped Jacob expand their herd. The homestead grew into a working ranch, prosperous and well-respected. Jacob's hair began to gray at the temples. Willa's hands grew rough from work but remained gentle. They aged together, partners in every sense, and their love deepened with each passing season. On their 20th anniversary, they stood together in the same courthouse where Judge Morrison had married them in desperation. Morrison was long retired, but the new judge agreed to renew their vows as a formality and a celebration. Delilah and Kira stood as witnesses, both grown women now. Samuel Burke and his wife attended, along with a handful of neighbors and friends. The ceremony was simple. Jacob and Willa spoke the same vows they had spoken 2 decades earlier, but this time there was no desperation, no fear, only love and certainty. "I do," Jacob said, looking into Willa's amber eyes. "I do," Willa said, smiling at the man who had become her whole heart. The judge pronounced them married again and always, and they kissed while their daughters cheered and the small congregation applauded. That night back at the ranch, they sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The stars were brilliant overhead and the air smelled of pine and grass and home. 20 years, Willa said, from a lie to save your life to this. The best 20 years, Jacob said. And I want 20 more, 40 more, however many we get. We will take them, Willa said. Every one. Jacob held her hand, the same hand he had held in a jailhouse 20 years ago, making a desperate bargain. The hand that had held his through building a home, raising children, creating a life. "I am glad you shouted," he said. "That day in the square, I am glad you lied." Willa laughed. "So am I. It was the best decision I ever made." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the worst possible moment and built from it something beautiful and lasting. The ranch stretched around them, the product of their labor and love. Their daughters slept safe inside. Their life was full and good. Jacob thought about the man he had been, standing on the scaffold with a noose around his neck, certain his story was over. He had been so wrong. His story was just beginning, waiting for an orc woman with courage and a lie that became the truest thing he ever knew. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Willa squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being worth saving, for being worth loving, for being mine." "Always," Jacob promised. "Always yours." And in the quiet of the night, on the land they had claimed and the life they had built, that promise held all the weight and wonder of 2 decades and the hope of all the years still to come.